the Imaginaries. We are the Imaginaries, Tony, Alyssa, and Kendra. 3 amateur discussionauts diving into the subjects that interest us most, many of which, of course, revolve around the notion of science fiction and representation in film, comics, books, and other forms of mass culture. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you stick with us through the whole podcast.
I want you guys to tell me how you guys discovered Alien and the whole series.
I actually have a funny story about that. Actually, I have a couple of funny stories. I wandered in, and I wanted to see there was like an edited version of Aliens on like TMC or AMC or one of the movie channels, like back when I was maybe like middle school. But at that point, like my parents had both seen Alien and Aliens, you know, back when they came out in the 70s and 80s, and they were like, oh, this is a really scary movie, you don't want to see this. Which, disclaimer, I have always hated scary movies, so when they said this is a scary movie, you don't want to watch it, like, that meant to me, oh my god, don't watch this or you'll have nightmares for years. So I was like, alright, not going to watch it. But I was fascinated at the same time because I was really into science fiction. So I was like, alright, how do I actually get a sense of what these movies are without actually watching them? So my answer to this was, and this is in, you know, the early days of the internet, like the early 2000s now, I was like, I'm going to look up the scripts online and read the scripts for Alien and Aliens, which I then did, and I don't know if you guys have done this, like read scripts for movies you have not yet seen, but in that case, it was actually still really scary. Like, that script was terrifying to me. But, okay, so, and the second part to that story is that when I was a junior in high school, I got together some friends, I think one of whom who had seen Alien before, but the rest of us had not. And we were like, this seems like an important movie we all want to see and should see, but none of us are brave enough to watch it alone. So we're going to get together and watch it one night. And it was funny because my parents were like, also there that night, the night that we watched it, and apparently they said later, they were like, we expected you guys to be like scared shitless at this movie, and instead what we kept hearing was you would just burst out laughing, like the entire group would just burst out laughing. And the reason why we did is that we were all so scared, like none of us wanted to leave after it was over, like everyone had to drive home in the dark and no one wanted to. But we're like, it was a combination of being so scared by the movie, but also finding the effects so cheesy. Like, you know, seeing for the first time a movie that was made in 1979, and like, especially when Dallas has the flamethrower and the alien is like creeping up on him, and then he turns around and it's right there, but it does like this motion like it's about to hug him. We just like lost it. We thought that was so funny. And yet we're like, oh god, that was the worst, and it was so terrifying. But anyway, that was my introduction to the Alien.
And Alyssa, how about you?
That's awesome. This would have been shortly after I graduated college, so probably about 4 or 5 years ago, that I finally, it was one of those where I knew that it was this cult classic, and I had not seen it. And I started going through some of these films. And so Aliens, of course, I had to go through the series. And I actually watched, probably through Netflix, mostly. I think I rented some. And I watched all of the Alien films. And then I watched all of the Predator films. And then I watched all the AVP films. So I went on this huge binge of must-see all of these great sci-fi films that were mostly before my time. So my story is not quite as exciting, but I I was glad to go through them. I like the first one the best still. I don't know that I found it scary though.
That's a good point. I mean, I think there are moments where it is horrifying. I'm not sure whether I was frightened. Because with all of these movies, you watch them with the predicated assumption that it's going to be in your face, gore, things jumping out of dark corners, like that's just part of watching one of these movies. And like you know that from the trailers, you know that from what other people say. So yeah, I didn't find myself scared watching these movies at all. And my background with them is much more checkered and patchy than either of yours, because my introduction to Alien was, like many other genre interests that I have, founded on late night Australian television. After my parents had gone to bed, I would sneak downstairs, at least in the houses where we had downstairs. There were multiple houses, and some of them had stairs and some didn't. But it was always more exciting when it was a house with stairs, because I would sneak downstairs and I would turn on the television just loud enough for me to hear. And I would watch horror movies and Bollywood. And those were the two things that were on late at night. That and occasionally...
Wonderful.
I remember seeing an episode of Firefly with you in college, Alyssa, and recognizing it as something that I had seen at least half of on late night Australian television. It was the episode where Mal ends up wandering naked in the desert. And it was very memorable when I was, 15. So I remembered it, and I remember Alien 2 in the same way, but it's very piecemeal because I never caught the whole movie of any of these. So this last week actually marks the first time that I have sat down and start to finish watched each of these 4 movies. And I know that some people are going to be like, oh, there aren't 4 Alien movies. 2 of them don't exist. But I did my best to do justice to the Alien legacy. So Prometheus I have watched many times and own, and then Alien now I have sat down and rewatched. So that's my background, but it's not as holistic or I would say as dedicated as either of you guys. Both of you guys have a background with it that I don't. So after watching it the first time, what were your impressions, Tony? Apart from this is kind of cheesy special effects, obviously something about it stuck with you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, at that point, the impressions I can remember in particular are that they shot the hell out of that cat, Jones the cat, and we're like, oh my god, the cat was in league with the alien the entire time. It's so obvious. It's in the subtext. They didn't even try and hide it. But apart from that, I just remember, because I grew up with Star Trek, too. Star Trek was really my big sci-fi influence. So, seeing in the Alien movies, and again, recognizing that they're supposed to be horror, and they're supposed, and, more than just horror, but, bodily horror. They're doing things to bodies that should, that are meant to evoke these terrible, visceral feelings. But, I was so used to, in Star Trek, the Vulcans have ears, and the Klingons have foreheads, and all the aliens in Star Trek have some variation on ears or foreheads, which, of course, is, way too simplistic, but for the sake of an argument, that's what I remember. Whereas in Alien, you have this really complex life cycle of the xenomorphs, where, there's just so many things that I then realized afterwards were, taken from biology, or these are things that exist on Earth. We've just, sort of recycled them to make them seem sci-fi and seem alien. Plus the amazing, amazing designs of H.R. Geiger, which dude was fucked up, but it was really cool.
Awesome.
And, so just sort of the aesthetics and the atmosphere, I think, were really what brought me into that world. And as opposed to something for example, Harry Potter, which, I still, given, even though it's problematic and whatever, the world is so large and complete and stuff that, I want to be in that world. The Alien universe is very much the same thing, but for a different way. It just felt so complete, and even though we have so many mysteries and so many questions, and those are good things, but the way that they built it, especially given that Alien was supposed to be like a one-off movie where everyone died and there was no continuation, like just the thought they put into building the universe was so cool, and that's something that really stuck with me, I think.
And by the way, if you guys hear hideous cawing noises in the background, that is actual hideous cawing noises from the crow sitting outside my window mocking my cat. So, apologies.
Make it your pet.
I know. So, Alyssa, how about you? What sticks with you? I heard you nodding. I saw you nodding to a lot of what Tony said. So, for you, the legacy of Alien is?
Well, one thing that sticks out to me is in any film, are creatures. I love the creatures in films. I like fauna. And so I think that, especially for me, I was doing like the AVP comparison a little bit, was I think in some ways sort of the simplicity of the creatures. They don't really have these crazy, their abilities come naturally, but it's like in, they're poisonous blood, they're acidic blood. And it's not until I think in the later films where like you actually see them spit it, right? I don't think in the first film it's used as a projectile. And so it's one of those where their natural biology is also what makes you not want to just shoot them to pieces in the middle of your ship in space. And so for me, I really liked thinking about how you have to then combat the creature in space while fighting for your life, but its own death could cause yours. And that, they're large, but they aren't like, I don't know, they're also these slender creatures that can move really easily through your ship, and so they can be anywhere. They hide really well. I don't know, they just kind of stuck out to me, especially compared to Predator, right? They're a bit beefier, the Predators are beefier, and use more kind of weaponry. I don't know, those were a couple of things that kind of stood out to me.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask before Kong intervened about how much of the horror in Alien comes from horror of or fear of our own bodies, because every analysis I've ever read of Alien, which granted is not a huge number, but every single analysis references the fact that Geiger actually drew his designs based on human bone structure, upon the female specifically anatomy. There are phallic images as well, but there's a lot of female anatomy in the designs, and the aliens themselves are relatively approximate to humans. It's just that you peel away maybe skin, maybe you peel away soft eyeballs and things like that. You end up with what's hard and what's kind of slimy about the human body just on the surface. I don't know, I just been thinking about that as I was watching the films, and the strength of the first two really does reside in the alien body, and whatever else happens in the third and fourth movies, they just don't capture the body horror in the same way.
I would agree, yeah.
So in terms of design, Tony, you've already mentioned Geiger as an enormous draw to the film. What do you know about Geiger's involvement, and whether or not he played an influence in the Episode 3, Episode 4, prequel-ish Prometheus thing?
My understanding, and this is coming off of, I don't know, I feel like I should have a warning that's like, I could be making shit up, but as far as I know, as far as I remember reading, he was really just there for the first movie. Like, again, I think there was no plan to make, like, Alien was supposed to be a one-off where everyone died at the end, and the only reason that Ripley survived, and I forget if they went back and refilmed it, or if they filmed, like, 2 endings and then tested which one they were going to go with, or what exactly the deal was, I forget. But, there was not supposed to be this continuation of the series. So I think that all of the groundwork was laid in that first one for it to continue. But I know, like, for Aliens, James Cameron did a lot of like taking the Geiger designs and trying to make more of a world with them. And I imagine a lot of the production designers did. But as far as I know, he was only ever involved in the first one, and even then, if I remember correctly, I mean, he was hired by the production staff for Alien, but they actually found some of his work and then decided that they wanted to base the design for the movie around that. So it wasn't that they brought him in and he did something with it. Like, they found what he had done previously and was like, and then said, that's weird, that's strange, that's horrific, like, let's bring this guy in, but let's also base our movie designs on some of his stuff.
And Geiger has a pretty profound influence on science fiction art and aesthetic outside of the Alien saga. Like, he was big before Alien, I believe. Maybe not in the US, but he was big abroad. And his style has been copied and imitated and recreated time and time again since. I don't think we'd really seen a design concept like Geiger's on the big screen before Alien. There is something of the Art Deco in it that is also very interesting to me. Like, there is the structural components that resemble bodily body parts in terms of bones or soft anatomy, and then there's also like Art Deco influences, which I find very, very interesting. And I think of this Tumblr post I read a while back, which actually purported that the Mercury transit system, there were these Mercury trains in New York up until the mid-50s, I believe, that they were Geiger creations. And this person had created this entire sort of fan fiction, if you want to call it that, which, quote-unquote, exposed how the Mercury trains were Geiger's nefarious creation, even though they predate Geiger. I think it was actually Geiger's father or something like that created these trains in this person's imagination. And they were trying to connect the Art Deco influence with Geiger in a really interesting way. And they did it through creating this fictional account of this demonic train system that got exposed and then shut down once they realized that when you took the shiny lid off of each train, there were these alien designs underneath that were demonic. It was very funny at the time, but I think it belies this larger attempt to try and fix the design of Geiger, which is now inseparable from Alien, trying to fix it in time and space and figure out what it means, which I find really, really interesting. Because Alyssa, you have a very deep attraction to science fiction design as well. What would you say about Geiger and the design, at least in the context of what you like and enjoy?
I think that I would describe it as kind of simple, right? Mm-hmm. And it has, I see that in a lot of science fiction even, is that it gets this very sterile atmosphere. And in part of that would be you're in space. And so you've got to think about how to stay clean and organized a lot better. But I think that it also can, when looking at like the thrilling aspect, if you've got minimalistic atmosphere, there are a lot fewer places to hide, which is why you go to things like events and stuff. And so I think in some ways it can, I think, add to sort of it kind of heightens the thrill, I think.
To not see something in a design construct that is entirely focused on making the invisible visible. Like, that's what minimalism is. It's trying to make everything visible, but also keep it entirely simple. And I think it's worth noting, too, that Geiger's designs were used exclusively to inform the constructs of the aliens. So the designs of the Nostromo and the other human architectural creations, those are much more informed by straight up traditional Art Deco, and I think something of the Kubrick aesthetic too. Like there's a very 2001 atmosphere to at least the first Alien movie. I don't know if you guys noticed a shift like I did, but the first Alien movie is fairly Kubrickian, and then the second one is more of this Vietnam era war movie.
I just remember reading a while ago, and this can be a full conversation for another time, but how Aliens is essentially what a lot of folks assumed Starship Troopers would be, as, or I should say, a film adaptation of the book Starship Troopers is essentially what Aliens turned into. Like, it's very much like, war in space, humans versus aliens. Which is to say, rather, this is the conversation I want to have later. I really like the movie Starship Troopers because I think it's brilliant and satirical, and like everyone's like, oh, but it's not what the book was. And I'm like, yeah, it borrowed a name, and that's literally all. It has in common, like, it is satire. It is satire of war, of science fiction, of everything right on down to like colonialism and I don't know, tons of things. I just think that movie is brilliant, but that is a conversation for another time.
Yeah, but we should talk about adaptations and Starship Trooper separately or together at some point, because I think you're right. And I think you bring up another interesting point, which is the notion of science fiction providing us a platform for social commentary in a very interesting way. So if Alien is doing that work, if it's commenting on our world, that might explain the shift from 1 to 2, but what does that say about 3 and 4? I mean, what goes wrong there?
Right, and it seems like it's actually, as much as 2 is trying to provide commentary on the Vietnam War and war generally, and, sort of like, essentially it's saying, like, here's a portrait of humans in space, even though that's not the point of the movie by any means. Like, thematically, there's a lot going on in Aliens. Whereas in the third one, I mean, and just thinking specifically of the third one, like, they could have done really similar work with, like, commentary on prison systems and dynamics within prison systems, and who enforces prison systems and who's within prison systems. And that's not something that movie, I mean, they're basically in a prison, and that's the end of it. Like, that's the end of that point. Or, like, the fourth one could have done something with, I mean, it was the late 90s, so maybe it had a lot to say about cloning and genetic engineering and, like, a lot of conversations like that. But again, there were clones involved. There were lots of Ripleys. There were some Ripley aliens. There were some human aliens, alien humans. That's done. No talking about it. Which is not to say that the second spent a lot of time, like, being super preachy about, like, here's human war in space. But it was, I don't know, it did it quietly, and it did it without you really knowing it, and it managed to, again, in the same sort of way that the first one did, not the same, it didn't create the same atmosphere, but it created an atmosphere, and that atmosphere was very much reminiscent of and indicative of war, especially the Vietnam War, and I say this obviously as someone who knows that very well, but, like, I think it's interesting to compare it to, for example, Joe Haldeman's Forever War, given that that's also a book about a war in space, written by a Vietnam War veteran, and yet Aliens and Forever War are very different in terms of the characters, in terms of what happens in the books, and yet I would assume that, like, if Forever War was going to be adapted, and, like, I sort of hope that it won't be, because I don't think you would do it, but, like, atmospherically and aesthetically, I think you could make more or less the same thing as Aliens. Like, the movie atmospherically and aesthetically could be very similar to Aliens. I don't know. That sort of went nowhere.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that Aliens has context. It even has parallel texts. If you want to say Forever War is a parallel text. Obviously not intentionally, but, unintentionally. It has a larger conversation happening around it. I'm not sure whether with prisons and what happens in Alien to the Power of Three, as I will forever call it, I'm not sure with the third installation whether that conversation had reached quite the same level of sophistication. Even today, I'm not certain it has, as compared to conversations in the late 70s and early 80s about Vietnam.
That's true. I think you're right. And I mean, like, you could talk about things like, you could talk about the Vietnam War and even say, this movie is a direct parallel of the Vietnam War or whatever, and that was an acceptable thing to do with something like Aliens, whereas I don't know, and I think you're right, even now, like, if Alien 3, like, if reviewers were going out of the way to say, hey, this, sci-fi horror thriller flick, whatever, is also a critique of, like, the American prison system, like, that probably, I don't know, that seems like it would be a harder sell.
And it would be too shallow of a depiction, I think. It goes for too many of what I taught my students in creative writing to call the easy reach, the easy metaphors, the easy sort of depictions of something. And so it's very stereotypical in a sense, but not accurate at the same time.
Yeah.
And Alyssa, how about you? Like, where do you think Alien to the Power of Three and Alien Resurrection go wrong? I was texting you a little bit as I watched, and you seemed to be on the same page as me with this is a complete trash fire and should never have existed. So, like, how did you get to that place? Or, like, what was your initial reaction to these later installments of the Alien world?
Well, the first time I saw the third one, not only does the tone change a lot, but I felt the first time that I watched it, the sexual overtones were heavier in 3. I think they were heaviest in 3, even though they are there through all the films. No, they're even there in 4, actually, just in different places. But I didn't appreciate that as much. I mean, they put her in a male prison at a place full of rapists and abusers. Yeah. And I think that, as we're talking about how they didn't comment on the prison system, I mean, that's all that they gave us, right? They gave us, the part of the danger of 3 was the men, moreover than the aliens, when the alien at least isn't present. And I think maybe that's an interesting commentary on our society, perhaps, more than just the straight-up prison systems, is that we can set up men as more dangerous or just as dangerous, Going into the cafeteria just to get food is dangerous for her.
Yeah, I remember that scene.
Yeah.
It's the first movie where they actually use the term rape, right? Because in the first 2 films, you still have the same alien impregnation mechanism, which has been, of course, compared to rape. But I think Alien to the Power of Three was the first movie that actually used the language of rape. And
put it in a heavier concept of that, one where you can't ignore it as easily. I mean, there's even a scene where that, there's the threat of that, and one of the other guys comes to her rescue, which is also problematic to me to show, like, oh, you're the good guy because you're the one guy who's not going to succumb to these things, as somehow making him a good guy, I think. Somehow that redeems his past.
By being a decent person, you were somehow an exceptionally good person, that kind of leap.
Yeah. Or like, we'll forgive you for everything else because, look, you're nice to her because this is the only context in which we have any sort of character development for you. Or, this film is all we get, and all we know is you're bad until you treat this one woman nicely who showed up on your doorstep. So I didn't appreciate that as much. Seeing it a second time, and this was actually, I think, my third time going through the series. The second time, I think I paid attention to a little bit to a few other things, or it didn't seem quite as bad, because, I mean, Ripley holds her own a little bit, but I don't know, that was one with the third that stood out to me. With the fourth one, I don't care for the alien creature at the end. I think that was just a first of all, it's hideous, which I know is part of the point. It's hideous, and it looks like it's about to cry.
It does.
At any moment.
All the time.
I think it's got a tattoo of a little teardrop. Mom, why don't you love me? and the fourth one, they sexualized, like, her with the alien a little bit more. I don't know if it was supposed to. I mean, there's somewhat of that maternal aspect to it, but it was just
well, she's getting licked.
So weird.
She's getting licked. It's more kinky than maternal. The second movie had a lot of, like, normal-ish maternal behaviors, and the fourth movie is just, here is an alien who might eat your face and who might also lick you constantly. I mean, the threat level in 3 and 4 just falls through the floor. I think that's part of what made them less appealing to me. Is there's no danger to Ripley, who is the only character that you care about left in the third and fourth. Right. Which, by the way, is a terrible decision to just kill everyone at the start of Alien to the power of 3.
Yeah. Yes. Right. And that's, I don't know, that, I mean, you know, that, again, has been hashed over forever and ever since the movie came out, you know, many, many years ago, but I think it's worth saying that it was just, like, a lot of the emotional work and, like, why Aliens remains such a good movie, and, like, why Sigourney Weaver got nominated for an Academy Award. Because she's awesome, first of all, but, like, that movie gave her a lot to work with, and, like, by, you know, showing that her relationship with Newt could be completely undone, you know, in the time between number 2 and To the Power of 3. And, like, you know, the prejudice that she could overcome towards the android, Bishop, could be, you know, completely, you know, thrown out the window again between 2 and 3. Like, it basically was erasing all of Ripley's character development, which was really, really frustrating because, again, like you just said, like, we care about Ripley, and yet they were trying to put her in this situation where, you know, she had emotional stakes, and we were trying to follow her, but it's working, the third movie especially, and then the fourth followed in the same vein, but it was working against itself because it was presenting us with this character that we were supposed to care about, and even though she was played still by Sigourney Weaver, like, they had completely done away with the character that we had, you know, grown like in the first 2 movies, and wanted to know that she was safe and believe that she was able to overcome these aliens and survive because she's wonderful and awesome and has gone through all this character growth. And they just pretended like that was something that they could flush off screen to, I don't know, make a different movie or make a movie series or something.
And it's disturbing too that not only did they do it once to great distress of alien lovers, but they did it again to her at the start of Alien 4, which is another reboot in a sense. Like, they wipe her by virtue of cloning her and her not having, in essence, her memories. She has some, enough to be convenient to the plot, but not enough to remember the human, compassionate side of her, which was being developed over the course of the first and second films. I think it's very interesting that they would do all that hard work and then be like, no, that's actually not the point of these movies at all, to discuss what's human. It's to live in just this body horror, only we're going to fail at that too, and we're just going to show you a bunch of kind of drooling aliens running around in dark spaces, and that's going to be our appeal. I don't think that the alien was ever really the greatest appeal. It was Ripley.
Yeah. Well, and 2, with 4, the shift kind of goes away from the aliens themselves. Like, okay, in the first film, the aliens are the bad guy, essentially, right? They're the biggest threat, and it's basically what resources humans have versus natural predators. In the second one, it's kind of similar, but you have added the company, right? And the company basically becomes the enemy in 4. they kind of skip the company in 3 because we go, well, you get the company at the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
But 3 mostly takes place in the prison, and the company isn't present there until the end. And so 4, you're at the company, you're with the company. They are in control of Ripley, and they are trying to take control of the aliens. And in a sense, it becomes like Jurassic Park-esque, where we can control nature, and the truth is that we can't. And so they're kind of, I would argue that the aliens sort of become the background through which there is danger, but that the enemy is the company trying to take control, where they won't be able to maintain that.
So in essence, they change the status of the alien from character to plot device, in essence. Like, they're there to be background.
I think so, to an extent.
Yeah.
To an extent, yeah. Because it's not that they're gone, and it's not that they have no threat. And I love the scene where they're in captivity. He has 3 of them in the room, and the scientist comes back in, and he's having this moment where he teaches them what will happen if they lash out. You know, he'll give them the cryo freeze, but that they figure a way around that. And I love adding, like, us having that moment of watching them figure it out. I love things like that. And so the aliens are still there. They're definitely a threat. They're way smarter than we think they are. But it was the company who made that possible all over again. I don't know. It adds a different lens, I think, through which to view the danger maybe.
I think it's taking a little bit of a segue too here. I think it's really interesting that Alien, for all of its successes and failures, and cough cough, we know which ones are which. For all of its successes and failures, it's a franchise that keeps trying to reinvent itself, and it does something dramatically different each time. So you have episode 3, you have episode 4, you have Alien versus Predator, you have a crossover series of films, which I will admit I haven't seen yet because I want to watch the Predator films first. And then you have a prequel that's not really a prequel but is definitely a prequel. And now we're having a sequel to the prequel that's not really a prequel but is definitely a prequel. So I really think it's interesting how people keep coming back to this universe and keep trying to chip away at what they fell in love with the first time around. And they're failing spectacularly in some ways, but they're also doing really interesting things. Like, I would never have predicted that Alien and Predator would have had a crossover. That, to me, is like Star Trek and Star Wars having a crossover, which we all know would be another trash fire, but also really interesting. Like, people have done it in fan fiction since the beginning. So let's talk a little bit about, like, innovation and, you know, what that has done for the Alien universe, as well as talk about Prometheus a little bit. I don't know all of your perspectives on Prometheus, so let's talk about that.
What's really fascinating to me, because again, I think you're right, but it's just, the most fascinating part to me is just that filmmakers, script writers, people who make movies want to come back to this universe. Like, there's something about it that is compelling, and, you know, whether that's what exactly that is, whether it's alien design or, you know, Geiger design or atmosphere larger than that, aesthetics larger than that, the character of Ripley, the historicity of it all, or some combination, or things that are not that at all. But something keeps people coming back to that, to the franchise, and I think that's very, very interesting. And again, I'm going to contrast this with Star Trek, because for me at least, because I think you could describe Star Trek in the same way. You know, you had the original series in the 60s, then you had the movie series, like, you know, starting at the end of the 70s through the beginning of the 90s. You had it reinvented with Next Generation, serialized on, you know, not on any major network in the 80s and 90s. Then you had Deep Space Nine, you had Voyager, you had Enterprise, and each time Star Trek reinvented what it did. Then it went away for a while, but, you know, you still had books, you had Star Trek Online, you had multimedia. Now you have the reboot movies, and now we're getting a new Star Trek series, Star Trek Discovery, set to start airing, I believe, at the end of this year, which
I'm
is
so
going to be
excited.
awesome.
Yeah.
But But it's the same kind of thing, right? It's this thing that keeps reinventing itself. But, and again, for me, like, I can understand that Star Trek presents us with this utopian version of the future, which is sort of not problematic in the original series and even to some extent Next Generation, but which Deep Space Nine, obviously I'm going to give myself away as like a major Deep Space Nine fan here, but like they confront these things that are problematic. Like if you want to get to utopia, how do you get there and how do you maintain it? And that's something that Deep Space Nine really looks into. But again, for me, like Star Trek presents this vision of here is an optimistic future, and we got there. We figured it out. And so it isn't really a surprise that people want to return to that. You know, this place where we have overcome these petty problems and where we can look at things. Not only that, but where we can think about things via analogs. Like, that's not even the right word. Analogously. But you know, looking at contemporary problems through the lens of science fiction in a way that also presents us with a way to see it as not insurmountable, but like this is a thing we can deal with because we got there, the Star Trek universe, in the first place, and they're working through their problems, but it's a lens for us to work on our problems. Anyway, I could go on for a long time about Star Trek, but what's interesting to me is that the Alien universe is kind of the exact opposite of that. Like you have this shitty corporation, which is, identifiably the bad guy in multiple movies. You have the aliens, which are, very interesting design, very cool, but kind of objectively terrible for humans every time they run into them. Mm-hmm. And, there's no desire for me as a person or as not just as a person, but as a viewer to like look at these things and be like, oh gosh, I really want to live in the alien universe. I do not want to live in the universe. I want to live nowhere near the alien universe. And yet, there are compelling things about it. And I want to watch more alien movies, and I want to return to that universe, and so do filmmakers.
But, I wouldn't mind living in the Prometheus universe as long as I wasn't, actively hunting down the engineers like they are. They have a cool ship. They've got Idris Elba. They've got Charlize Theron. There's a lot about the universe of Prometheus that is kind of like an upgrade in terms of look and feel. So I don't know how much of the not wanting to live in the alien universe comes from the fact that it was a deliberate decision in at least the first two movies to have them living in rubbish heaps. Like they deliberately pulled outdated technology, even for the first one. That technology was already outdated that they were using. And they did that intentionally. They wanted it to look like essentially the 1978 or 9 analog of the new Ghostbusters lab, where they actually pulled discarded engineers, physicists' lab materials and stuck them in this Chinese restaurant to make it look like they're using a lot of outdated technology to create their stuff. I think that there's something about Prometheus that's different that we have to set aside in terms of desirability. There's something very sexy about the spaceship. There's definitely something sexy about Charlize Theron, let's face it. And Idris Elba does very nicely for himself too. And Noomi Rapace is kick-ass, but more of a Ripley person. I think even in their choice of Sigourney Weaver in the original series, they weren't looking for the sexy. She became a sex symbol after, because people were like, hey, I like this film. Why do I like this film so much? It must be because there's something attractive about this person. So she became a new kind of sex symbol, which didn't exist before Sigourney. So I don't know. I don't even know what I'm trying to say here, except for the wanting to live in the world. That kind of desire alters over the course of even the original 4, from 2 to 3, I'd say, and alters again towards Prometheus.
I think that with Prometheus, that goes back, well, for me a little bit to space exploration. Mm-hmm. And I think that then putting, with the aliens, we do want more, and I think that while it wasn't touted as a prequel, it is somewhat of a, well, for simplicity, I'm going to call Prometheus a prequel, regardless of whatever. I mean, we go to a new planet, and the dangers are living on the planet itself. So they've kind of added, when they go out and get trapped in there, or even separate from the ship, the world itself provides some of the danger because we don't really have the aliens. But there's a mystery there that I don't think existed in some of the previous ones. We know about the alien biology. They give us a lot of that in the first one. And so as you go on, you don't necessarily need to know more about the alien, but we start to ask other questions about where did they come from, or can we even control them? And I think that with the first one, we were looking maybe for more. With the Prometheus as a prequel, we were maybe looking for more answers and maybe a bit of an origin story. And I think that those are some of those questions that they want to try to maybe give us with more films. Why do we keep revisiting this? Well, we want to know more, not just see more of what we already like.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting point, and in part because we have two parallel films being developed in the Alien universe. We have Ridley Scott's prequel-sequel thing happening, and we also have Neil Blomkamp's film with Sigourney Weaver, which will obviously have to be set in the distant future again. So it'll be interesting because we will get to know more both about what happens to Ripley, and we'll get to know more about where all of this started, which I do think was a kind of grand question to ask in Prometheus, and maybe they got a little too caught up in the grandness of the question and displaying how grand of a question it is where we come from. So you have this beautiful swelling orchestral score, you have these beautiful scenic pan shots over this primordial Earth and other planets and etc. Like, it was very atmospheric, but I'm not sure it got to the real pith of what we wanted. So if you were to have, like, a question answered about the alien universe, what would it be? I don't even know at this point, because I've now absorbed so much Alien in a week's span that I'm trying to sort out what it even means to be involved in the alien universe.
Right. Well, okay, so I have a couple of thoughts. The first thought is, I actually want to go back to the Prometheus as a prequel thing, but I don't want to derail this good question because I actually want to think about this.
Sure.
Because I find myself, wondering, or going back to Aliens, because they're both set on LV-426, and same planet. The Prospector team and Aliens finds the same ship, and they find the same egg chamber. I don't know that, because it's been a mystery for so long, I don't know that any answer they could possibly provide would be satisfying at this point. Like, if they said, the engineers from that ship, and I'm just going to go ahead and call them engineers, but the engineers from that ship were, fleeing from the aliens, and they had an egg aboard, and one got out and, fucked them up. Or they were using them as a biological weapon, or they were, they found them on that planet, or, whatever they could possibly come up with, just having that sort of, Schrodinger range of possibility is something that I think is attractive about the franchise. And if they were to hammer it down and say, well, no, the engineers did this for this reason, and that's where the aliens came from, that would actually be, even though it would be, intellectually satisfying in one way, because it would be answering a question that was first asked decades ago, it would also collapse a lot of really satisfying possibility. And I don't know that I would be ultimately happier with that question answered than without. So there's sort of a roundabout way of saying, I'm interested in them exploring things in the franchise that they haven't explored before. I don't necessarily want to go back and really dig into the questions that have been opened up but not answered, because I think a lot of the time that's productive. I want to see them do new and interesting things, because as much as I have to admit I'm not a fan really at all of the Alien versus Predator films, but they were something new. It was completely sort of batshit insane and really out there, but it had not been done before. And I like that they had the gall to say, we're gonna take that cue from Predator 2, where the alien skull is on the wall, and we are gonna make a movie about it. and I appreciate that. For no other reason than it took gall.
Yeah, it took gall, and it definitely was fresh take on something that was starting to feel at the time pretty dated. I mean, I think that the third and fourth installments of the Aliens series dated a lot faster than the first two, and so on the heels of Alien Resurrection, there's more impetus to try and do something good or different because you've clearly failed so spectacularly. I mean, you really can't get any worse than that film, and I'm sure that having Hellboy 2 cracking his jokes and making sort of rapish commentary the entire film is like, it has a kind of virtue in a horror universe, but there is nothing redemptive about watching that film. There might have been redemptive thoughts going into its construction, or like people had good intentions that went very, very wrong. But like, I can imagine walking out of the theater and you're Ridley Scott or you're whoever directed the AVP films, and you're like, something needs to happen, and I know this is crazy, but here's my idea. And someone else was like, you know what, it can't be worse. Let's try it. Let's try and save this a little bit. You know, at least they were memorable. Like, I remember AVP, even though I haven't seen any of them, I remember when they came out and people going to the theaters to see them. So they did something. They may not have done the right thing, but they did something kind of cool.
Well, I think moving forward is kind of a good idea. I agree with you, Tony, because, I don't know, right now I feel like we're going backwards with films. How many reboots and reboots and reboots and reboots are we going to do of Tarzan and Snow White? And, you know, and so I think that now you're risking putting Alien into another reboot of Spider-Man. We don't need any more Spider-Man. And I think that there's perhaps potential, I like the Schrodinger analogy. And instead of maybe defining for us whether the cat's alive or dead in the past, how about we kind of Pandora's box the future and open Pandora's box into the future? I think has a lot more potential, maybe even for Alien as a franchise.
So instead of going back to my question about what questions you'd like answered, here's a different question. Moving forward, are you more excited then about the possibility of this Neil Blomkamp film featuring Sigourney Weaver? And if you are even remotely excited about that film, like, what would you be most excited to bring back or for them to maybe innovate in that film?
I'm excited for that movie, based in part on, you know, the good feelings I still have about District 9 and how that, you know, going way back to when we were talking about things that, you know, Alien and Aliens especially did with, like, social commentary, and things that, like, the third and fourth movies could have done but didn't quite do. I think that District 9 is a really good example of, you know, what sort of that missed potential. So knowing that he's behind this new Alien movie seems like, you know, it could be a really positive thing. And then Sigourney Weaver is just the character of Ripley, and the strength that she puts into it when, you know, she has a good script like Aliens and the original Alien. That makes me excited. Both of those things make me really excited. Like, by no means do I want to just, like, leave Ripley behind. I think that would be, you know, a really interesting thing to do more, like, branching out, see who else is in this universe. But as far as, you know, the character of Ripley is concerned, I'm still fascinated by her. And I think that we would do very well to continue learning about her and see, you know, what other developments she has in store and what kind of situations she can get into and out of again. And again, I feel like I said this in our introduction, but I really love Contact. I love Jodie Foster in Contact. I think the character of Ellie Arroway is amazing. So when I found out that Neil Blomkamp was making a sci-fi movie with Jodie Foster and Matt Damon starring, because Matt Damon is also, you know, an actor I very much respect, I was like, oh my god, there's no way this can't be good. And yet, like, again, it really tried to be a lot of social commentary, but a lot of it fell flat. And I was ultimately disappointed with that movie and what I got from it. So I guess my excitement for the new Alien is tempered a little bit because I know that he can do successful films like District 9, and then for the average films like Elysium, and then apparently Chappie. And I don't want to say without seeing it, but I'm willing to trust some of the reviews that I've read that say, this is not really that great of a movie.
Elysium is interesting to me because, on the one hand, with District 9, I don't know if most American sci-fi lovers had ever thought of a crossover with the actual historical drama of apartheid and the various complications that, of course, arise from portraying apartheid on the big screen. I mean, I think what it did was it provided a surprisingly good outlet for discussing the issues of apartheid without discussing the issues of apartheid, whereas Elysium was a lot more upfront, opaque about what it wanted to discuss. It was like, we're going to discuss inequality, and we're going to actually discuss inequality on the big screen, which isn't the same thing as what District 9 did, which was provide a metaphor that happened to be sci-fi for something that's actually happening in the real world. I think, yes, there's actual inequality in the real world, and Elysium is portraying that, but Elysium is being very, very obvious about portraying it. Like, there's no distance between subject and metaphor there, and that does tend to collapse our ability to, I think, take joy in some of the more unusual aspects. Like, there's joy to watching District 9 and being like, this is weird and cool. Elysium's a lot more like, this is horrifying and possibly accurate. I think the grandest moments of Elysium are, of course, when they're panning out and you've got these big screen depictions of the space station. You're like, oh, that actually looks pretty cool. Like, that might be the best moment of Elysium, which is sad because I also agree with you. I personally adore Jodie Foster, and Contact really was a defining film for me in terms of what sci-fi can do and do well. And Matt Damon, I will be first in line probably to see Bourne 5, just because I grew up on Matt Damon being Bourne, and that's important to me for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with science fiction or even really film. So I don't know. I think probably we've about exhausted discussing Alien and Prometheus as prequels and sequels, but I thought what we could do to close our discussion today is maybe talk a little bit about successful prequels and sequels that have happened in other franchises. Like, I would like to propose a successful sequel that didn't make it big in the blockbuster market, but I love anyway. Tron Legacy, I think, did some very interesting things with the Tron franchise, and in my books is a successful sequel in a lot of ways. And I'm excited that it'll get a threequel here pretty soon. But how about you guys? Do you guys have like a favorite sequel or prequel or crossover in the vein of AVP?
I think it might be kind of silly, and I don't know that I would say it's in the vein of AVP, but when it comes to, I think, strong storytelling sequels, I think that the How to Train Your Dragon sequel stands out to me. Well, okay, that's one where you don't watch the trailer. The trailer started to spoil stuff, and so that was just bad advertising. But I think that it took the storytelling, I think, to a new level, where the first one, you get the dragons aren't tamed yet, and you have to figure out how to work with them. And in the second one, now they're tamed, but I think that they kind of opened that box into what possibilities do we have here, and they got really creative with what you can do with that. And then they gave Hiccup a family story that was interesting. And think that might be something, like going back to Aliens, where you have a world of possibilities. How cool, how crazy can we get with this? And instead of going back and, we need to cautiously maybe fill in some holes that people want, but I'd like to move forward more creatively with any stories that we're telling nowadays. Let's do more and be more and challenge ourselves that way.
It might be nice too in the current political climate, cough cough, if we have some hopeful, or at very least actionable futures to look to. Maybe not like utopias by any means. I think dystopias and apocalyptic stories also present, like in the vein of Mad Max, present us with some futures that are actionable, although not necessarily desirable. Mm-hmm. How about you, Tony?
So before I actually answer this question, I want to define a couple of things, or I guess just one thing. So for me, a sequel that really does a lot of work and is sort of, you have commodity A, whether it's a book or a movie or a video game or a TV show or whatever, and then you have a sequel, and that's not necessarily planned. Like, maybe you as content creator are really interested in it, or, it gets really positive feedback, and so you, for whatever reason, cop, maybe money, want to go back and explore some more and, produce a sequel. And I want to, make that distinct from, large franchises, not necessarily like Alien, but Star Wars, Star Trek, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, where, you have multiple entries in a series that are essentially, the Harry Potter books are a 7-book long story. I would not call the Harry Potter books sequels to the first book. The same way I would say, Star Wars 4, 5, and 6 are not, none of those are sequels, even though they kind of were, but they're, one continuing story.
Okay.
And I say that because what makes sequels most pleasing and most effective for me are that they reinvent what worked about the universe in the first place. And I've thought of a couple of examples. I actually think Aliens is a really good go-to example, because Aliens is a very, very different movie than Alien, even though you have Ripley, you have the alien, you're in the same universe, obviously, but the thematics are very different. Mm-hmm. So some of the examples I thought of that I think work really well. The first one was the transition between Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead. And I would like at some point, bookmark, to talk about how you deal with liking books when the authors are intensely problematic.
Like raging homophobes? Like raging
homophobes, like Orson Scott Card. However, I think that, when I first read those books, going from Ender's Game, which was amazing and I couldn't put it down, many years ago when I first read it, to Speaker for the Dead, which is entirely different, even though, again, it centers around the same main character in the same universe, was, a really effective way to continue in that universe, but write a sequel that was nothing like, there were no commentaries on children in war, there was no commentary on war generally, and it was completely different. Connie Willis's great books that are in the Oxford Time Travel series are, again, something I would really recommend as far as sequels go, because all of them are so thematically different. One of them, to say nothing of the dog, is a complete farce. It is a comedy, and that's what it's trying to do. Another one, the Doomsday book, is so depressing that, I had to put it down a few times and, come back to it, because I'm I can't deal with how this book is making me feel right now. So I think that's a really effective use of it, too. And finally, the last thing I want to say is the transition between Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra.
Yeah.
Because I really, really liked Avatar. And when we got to Korra, I thought the first couple seasons were a little shaky. Season 1 had its good moments. Season 2 was getting better. But seasons 3 and 4 of Korra are just so good. And even though, again, not only are you in the same universe, you're revisiting some of the same characters. In the 4th season, you see Toph. Toph is there, much older, and debatably much wiser. I would say much wiser, but still more or less the same Toph that we knew in Avatar. But Korra as a series is so different from Avatar that I think it works really well in that way. And it's not something that they, started with right away. Like the first season, and I think part of the second were, them really fighting to see what is the series going to be and how is it distinct from where we came from. But once they got into their stride and reinvented it and was like, this is the Legend of Korra. This is this series. It was really effective. So those are some examples of, when I think sequels work.
No,
really well.
I think that's a fantastic collection because you hit on a movie, a TV series, and a book series. So you had breadth and range there. Alyssa, do you have any picks of... I know that some comic artists will create multiple comic series within the same universe, and I know that's a lot more common with superheroes, but I was wondering if there were any others that you've run across that do something like that.
Comic stories are published somewhat slowly, and they continue on for decades, so even finishing one story can be challenging. I think it would maybe come across less as like sequels and more as spin-offs. You take characters and you do crossovers. The Lumberjanes is still an ongoing series. There isn't a sequel to the Lumberjanes, but there's currently a crossover with Gotham Academy being published right now. And I think that you start, even while stories are going on, you actually start telling parallel stories. I think it may be more the comics equivalent.
Am I wrong? Am I wrong in perceiving the comic universe as more fluid and flexible? Like, it seems like it's more responsive. Like, hey, we could do this cool thing, and then they actually do the cool thing. Whereas it seems like you need a certain amount of momentum to do that with film, which is what makes, I think, Alien and Predator a surprise to me, that you got two big franchises to get their ducks in a row, in a sense, and do something new.
I think that it would depend somewhat on the publisher. So, like, Marvel and DC have such massive, following, but as franchises, they're huge. And I think that there's a lot less flexibility in, if I'm understanding correctly, like kind of the things that you can do with the characters themselves. Like, they have to be, the writers and artists have to get that stuff approved. And so some storylines get shut down. And if you go to these smaller or self-owned publications, creator-owned publications, some of that indie stuff, things from Image, I read a ton of Image, that you have a lot more, when you have more control over your own content, you can do a lot more. And I think that you get more freedom with some of those more indie publications.
So they can kind of shift gears a lot faster than a film crew, which is made up of however many hundreds of people. So, okay, to close this out, I was thinking we could do a couple of recommendations. So a sequel or prequel, sequel, or series that is a must for people that you know and love and or do not know at all, as some of our listeners may be completely unknown to us.
Everything I said before, I would recommend. However, I just really fell in love with The Legend of Korra the last couple of seasons in particular, and I would recommend those. But I would recommend them, in conjunction with Avatar: The Last Airbender, and also, not ignoring the first couple seasons of Korra, but like sort of, you sort of get to see the process by which Korra becomes a sequel as opposed to a continuation, or, a footnote to a show that it was not. So I, one, because I really like them, but two, because I think that watching that journey on screen via, episodes that were actually produced and characters that actually grew is a really fascinating thing to behold. So that would be my recommendation.
On my part, I would like to recommend something we haven't talked about at all yet today, but we'll probably talk at some point on our podcast about, which is the Firefly Serenity sequel-ish thing that happened. Because it's another really unusual thing. They had a television series that died. and they decided to rescue it, or at least finish off some of their favorite storylines in a movie. That is, of course, set shortly after the series concludes. So that's an interesting example of an unusual sequel in my mind. And I think I would also note Kim Stanley Robinson's books. So many of them take place in the same universe and at least refer to events in previous books. So 2312 refers to some of the events in the Mars trilogy. And then his latest book, Aurora, makes reference to some of the same things. The accelerando, the fast progression of technology that happens once we get off the planet that enables us to, in essence, colonize the solar system. I think that what he does in that greater universe with, his trilogy and then subsequent books is really interesting. Not all of them are, I think, successful at it, and some of them definitely are. 2312 was, in my mind, a really superior book that I enjoyed greatly. So those would be my recommendations, on top of course, Tron. As I mentioned, Tron Legacy and the original Tron are just like a sample of a certain aesthetic from the 80s and then a certain aesthetic from the 2000s that I find really, really appealing. So, Alyssa, how about you?
With video games, I would absolutely jump to Mass Effect.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one series that I would argue does get a little bit better over time. People are going to murder me, but I even like the third one up until ignore the ending. Like, there's a part, probably about 30 minutes maybe before the game actually ends, which for me is where, like, the game officially ends in my book, because there's some controversy over the actual ending. But those three, they read like films, and I think they just tell, they have aliens and stuff, and I think they build on a character and a relationship that you want to know more, and in video games you get to develop that character, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so whereas in these other books we're relying on somebody else to tell us, and in video games they've already written things to happen, but these video games are, Mass Effect is specifically a choice-based game,
mm-hmm.
and ultimately you kind of end up at the same point, which was maybe part of the complaint, but you get to choose your path along the way through these stories as they build, and I do need to replay them at some point. But yeah, that's a series that I would say stands out.
Mm-hmm. And how about the Lara Croft games? Because you talk about those a fair amount.
Yeah. They've actually rebooted those, and a couple of years ago they rebooted, and they've gone. It's partially a reboot into, I think, where video games stand now. And maybe I think the way that we play video games is a little bit different, and so the way that you play Lara Croft is, I think, reminiscent more of a first-person shooter, and less on the platforming game that she originally was. But they've also rebooted in the fact that we're actually going back in time. And so while there's, I wouldn't call them sequels, it's more of that reboot, and you're actually getting the story of how she came to be who she is.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're actually really decent. I am somewhat of a recent Lara Croft fan. I didn't start until some of the later games, 7, 8, the anniversary, but I think they're taking her character in a direction that lets it lead to where they've already told us the story goes, but that revamps her into something new and fresh, which, as we've talked about, can be hard to do, especially when you're going back and trying to fill in holes, keep the authenticity of the character.
Well, that feels like a natural place for us to call it a show. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah.
You feel good?
Great about that.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope that you do your homework and you watch all of these series and enjoy them, and if not, then we will hunt you down and kill you. And
Yeah.
if you do, then we will hunt you down and be your friends for life. So please feel free to contact us through our Twitter accounts, which you'll find on our webpage. And please subscribe to follow us regularly. And goodbye.
Goodbye.
I might narrate
Bye.
over that. I don't know.
Thank you for joining us on the Imaginaries. We hope that you enjoyed our podcast today and recommend that you follow us on SoundCloud or the iTunes podcast app. You can find us on Twitter, at least two of us, Alyssa at Lomarian and me, Kendra, at intrepid.lee. Tony, of course, has yet to join the modern internet age. However, you can follow him and our various doings on our website, www.imaginaries.us. We look forward to seeing you there and engaging with you in discussion. Thank you, and see you next time as we discuss Star Trek Beyond and Shudder.